Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome two guests. First, Leo Gold, radio host of the New Capital Show that's on Houston's 90.1 KPFT. And John Betta, who's the publisher of the Houston Business Journal and also a radio co-host of the show Business Makers. And tonight we're going to be talking about the economy, joblessness, runaway federal government, etc., David.
But not property taxes, right?
No.
Thankfully, we're beyond that. So Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Great to be with you.
Yes. Here's to 2012.
2012
Could be a good year.
Hopefully. I know what that means, but we won't.
Peace and joy for the world.
That'd be good.
So the question for 2012, guys, given what we heard debated at the end of this year, is: are we going to be able to sort of tax break our way to prosperity? And what other strategies are being discussed that you were encouraged in hearing in the last debate over what we do at the end of the year with our budget, our federal budget? Either one of you just jump in there with that.
Well, I think the way to come out of a severe recession is you got to grow your way out of it. You can't. I've seen too many businesses, for example, that try to expense cut their way to prosperity, and that's not. That'll help in the short term, but in the long term, you really got to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit, the free market, the entrepreneurial spirit, which made this country powerful, rich, and economically successful in the first place.
Do they need tax cuts in order to develop spirit, John?
I think that money is better used in the private sector than it is in the public sector. Now, I will say this: I'm not an anarchist. There are legitimate functions of government, and they need to be funded. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be paying any taxes, but anytime you give the entrepreneurship kind of the entrepreneur in the United States a unfettered path to success, it usually works out.
Well, Leo, do you think that we have enough crony capitalism going on around in the country and the state, and it's really not doing the economy much good, is it?
Gary, I think it's a great point. There's quite a bit of crony capitalism, and one of the areas where I think left and right can come together is eliminating a lot of the problems that we have in the system, be it subsidies or incentives that have really become perverse. I do agree with John that we do have to grow our way out of the economy, and investment is the way to do it. I don't think that we're going to be able to tax cut our way out of it. If you take someone like Steve Jobs, who recently passed away, Steve Jobs began the business of Apple Computer with his partner Steve Wozniak in a garage, and they weren't particularly motivated by taxes. They probably weren't even thinking about taxes. They were certainly incented to grow the business. They knew they would become wealthy and they'd be able to keep some amount of their earnings and growth of their capital if they did it. But it's not the primary issue that got them going. They were American entrepreneurs unleashed by our system. And so I think we've tax cut our way about as much as we can. The long-term capital gains tax rate is at 15%. It's the lowest it's ever been. So I don't think there's going to be any way to reduce that any further.
But I agree with the conservative Republicans and the New Deal Great Society Democrats who think that it's a bad idea to cut the payroll tax cut that protects Social Security. It makes it converts it from a guaranteed intergenerational benefit to a welfare program. And so I'm a little nervous about that. How about you, Mr. Gold, Mr. Meadow?
Okay. I know there's a lot of conservatives that say you shouldn't be cutting that payroll tax. And I think any time the private sector gets to keep more of their money, I think in the long haul, I think it's going to be beneficial to all society.
How do you pay for it, though? That's a big chunk. That's $120 billion.
I don't look at it paying for it. The more money people get to keep, the more of it they're going to spend. So the taxes are going to come back anyway. And you look at the tax cuts that have happened in the past with Ronald Reagan and John Kennedy, and I think there was another president that cut taxes. The first term of George Bush, the economy actually grew. Tax receipts actually went up. When you hit the threshold, when you go over the threshold and start raising taxes too much, guess what? The economy goes the other way. It's happened all the time.
The problem with Social Security, my day job, I'm a financial advisor, and I see people even who have sufficient resources on their own using Social Security to support themselves. Social Security is a pension fund. And it is a very important pension fund for many people, as pension funds have continued to go away from corporate America. Social Security becomes even more important because it may be the last remaining pension that people have. And so one of the problems with cutting the payroll tax, much of it which goes to Social Security, is that we are jeopardizing the future. We're literally stealing from the future pensions of people who need it. And so that's why this has been such an interesting issue, this payroll tax cut, because it's been Democrats who've been advocating for cutting the tax and Republicans who've been advocating for not cutting the tax and for keeping it in place. Although that's not totally fair. Roughly half the Republican Party has been in favor of the tax cut, I think. You all may agree with that or disagree, and the other half has been against it. Yeah, so John agrees with it, but it is a problem to keep this pension plan in place. It is unique. It's a lot different than other discretionary expenditures, and it does work, and it has worked.
Well,
Sure.
Yeah, it does work because it's because we continuously borrow money to pay the benefits. It's really not a true pension plan. In other words, we don't. People listen to the show. You do not have a Social Security account with your number on it, with money being held in that account until the day you retire. That money is going to somebody else.
It is a pay-as-you-go system. That is true.
I wouldn't say pay-as-you-go. It's more like a Bernie Madoff system where you take the money from the later investors and give it to the people who are in it in the early part.
Oh, it's that old Ponzi scheme argument.
And sooner or later you run out of money, which Social Security is beginning to do.
Yes, but John, it's fair to say, as Leo said, if you cut the payroll tax, which goes to Social Security now, you're accelerating the point where when you get there, where the government or bonds
I think
are going to
we're
have
way
issues.
past
we
that
may be
anyway.
past that, but if you go back 5 or 10 years ago, enough revenue came in to fund the system each year. Now, we've sort of lost that, but
we dug about
$120 billion, we don't have that money that we're now not taking. And here's the better question for either of you. Do you think cutting the payroll tax has increased employment one iota in America? Has that made any difference?
You're going to need a lot more than $10-20 in your paycheck every pay period to do that.
Yeah,
I mean, our country is so far in the hole right now in so many ways. It's going to take a lot more than even a tax cut to get it back.
All right, well, let's talk about the hole. We had the super committee in Congress. The super committee was going to come together and decide to cut the budget by what, $1.8 trillion, which is a 1.5% or less of the budget, and they were unsuccessful. What does that tell you about where we're at in Washington today?
Well, it says that we still are not ready to face up to the big compromises that are going to have to be made. To this point, the Simpson-Bowles study and the Simpson-Bowles committee, to me, stands as the most bipartisan result that has come out of Washington. And it really was not adopted in any way by the president, by the Congress. Some segments of our government may have pushed for it. And yet it really stands alone. And rather than the super committee adopting Simpson-Bowles or anything like it, we continue to have this vociferous partisanship and a refusal to come together over a plan like Simpson-Bowles.
Well, so we have Osawatomie Obama now, Mr. Meadow, who says that we should ask people, the 300,000 who have average incomes of $1 million and up, to pay a little bit more. Any reason why we can't ask those folks to be paying higher taxes in order to get us out of the hole that you says we're in?
If you took every penny these people earned, you would not even put a dent in the deficit. And about the Simpson-Bowles fiasco, nowhere in there did they there's an elephant in the room on this whole federal deficit or whole federal problem, and that is the health care, the 2,800-page Health Care Reform Act, which I don't think anybody around this table has read, and I know nobody in Congress has read, but that is not even addressed in Simpson-Bowles.
But Medicare is. They do discuss Medicare in detail.
Yeah, well, Medicare, what they've done is they've taken money out of Medicare and then put it in to fund the health care plan. So it's a zero-sum game, if you want to call it that. But I got to tell you, if you ignore the one big piece of legislation that is burying this economy and leave that off the table, then the Simpson-Bowles plan is just as specious as whatever this super committee.
Of course, I didn't say that the rate should be raised to a confiscatory level.
I'm just saying.
I
said 2% is what discussions have been.
Discussions. It's going to start at 2%. Then it'll go to 5%. I know how these guys work, and it's.
Yeah, but John, as you correctly pointed out, if they raise taxes on people who make over $1 million a year. It's not going to make a dent in the deficit.
Right.
The bottom line is, if we don't take a look at our spending, and establish priorities and eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse in the government, we are not going to get there.
That's right.
Which means the country is in a downward spiral. And it's about, I guess at some point, not our generation, but a generation or two down the line, maybe it'll be the last person here turn off the lights in the Chinese world we'll live in then.
And here's the problem with the budget. They use what they call current services baseline when they do the budget. In other words, they don't start with zero every year and say, okay, this is what our revenue is. How are we going to fund all these programs, and do we need to fund them the same way? No, they take what they spent last year, add the rate of inflation, and then decide how much they're going to go. So.
In all segments of the government.
Do you run your business that way?
I don't.
I don't. I doubt if this station runs their budget this way.
But
you don't have to prepare for wars.
Right.
And you don't have a military-industrial complex
David,
to keep going.
And you bring up war, and of course, in the middle of this month, the war in Iraq literally formally came to a conclusion. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta on the 15th wound down the war. There were formal ceremonies, and the amount of money that was spent on that war. There were ceremonies.
Of course it's over.
The amount of money that was spent on this war, all in, all costs. I was with a gentleman the other day who works in the VA administration. He's apolitical as far as I can tell, but he was telling me that all in the costs are going to approach $3 to $4 trillion. I don't know who believes that we've gotten a tremendous return out of those expenditures, but people shouldn't be amazed that we're having a deficit crisis, that we're having a financial crisis, that we're having an economic crisis in this country when we throw that kind of money at projects that don't yield returns, and you have that kind of capital destruction, you are going to have economic crisis.
Well, part of the problem is also government trying to pick winners and losers, like the Obama administration and Solandra, $500 million loan guarantees for solar energy, and it failed.
It's a lot of money, $500 million, but we are spending,
and there are examples
in
of Republicans
Afghanistan,
too.
we are spending $10 billion a month.
And the American people are ready
Afghanistan.
to say adios because Afghanistan may be ungovernable.
That's right, they are.
But we can go back and worry about the
Iraq
War.
When the Taliban reconstitutes itself, and then
sure
they
that's
start
probably
training
gonna happen.
terrorists, and we get another incident here in
Gary
America.
brings up.
It will happen.
Gary brings up
Who's going to stop him?
another. He brings up another
Barack
subject
Obama.
that's got to be near and dear to your heart, and that is the Perry plan. You know, for all we know, Rick Perry's going to be president of the United States. So let's talk about. He says we need to have a across the board.
Possible.
We need to have a 15% flat tax, and then he says, John, you need to turn Houston's energy industry loose and let them explore and extract in the Arctic wildlife refuge. Off the shores of at the Gulf Coast,
California,
Western United
New
States.
York.
And let's build that pipeline, that Keystone Pipeline. That's 1 million jobs. Tell me about the Perry plan.
Well, we sent a reporter up to the Arctic Wildlife Reserve
in Alaska,
and she took pictures up there. And I got to tell you, there's nothing up there. Okay, the only thing we saw or heard about were the caribou that huddle around the pipeline because it keeps them warm. So I know it's pristine wilderness up there, but there's really nothing up there but oil. So I say, let's get it. Why not?
We actually could become a net exporter of oil.
We can get it, but the numbers are that this country burns and consumes 8 billion barrels of oil annually.
Right.
The vast majority of that oil goes for transportation purposes. We don't use oil for any other purposes very rarely except for transportation. And so the amount of proven reserves in the United States is a little over 20 billion barrels. So we have in proven reserves in this country only about 3 years of annual supply.
Well, you haven't been reading about the fracking, the shale plays that are going on around the country, where there are gas and oil deposits that can make us energy independent in a number of years.
That's a myth. Not at current consumption. No, it's a myth. At 8 billion barrels of consumption, there is no way we're currently importing, 70% of our oil needs from abroad.
And those shale plays will bring that way down, if not eliminate them.
It's not going to happen.
Well,
most of it's, the vast majority of it's natural gas.
So you want us to go back to horse and buggy?
Natural gas can supplant oil very easily in power plants and everything else.
Trucks. And we're getting natural gas now.
Okay, but I'm just saying, you're telling me we can't be energy independent.
No, we can't.
And I'm saying we can. If you combine the oil and the gas that's in that fracking, along with the offshore deposits that that we're not permitted to go after, the stuff in Alaska that we're
I
not
know
being
of no
permitted
numbers
to-
that I know of no numbers that say the United States can be energy independent. No
I do.
numbers, including those coming out of our large oil
So you're
companies.
suggesting that we also need to be
So you're saying I don't
encourage
know what I'm
energy
talking
efficiency.
about? Or what?
Absolutely. Energy
Okay.
efficiency is very low-hanging.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
Energy,
right.
energy efficiency is low-hanging
Do both.
fruit. Retrofitting of buildings, retrofitting of homes creates jobs. It creates energy efficiencies, and the oil that exists in places like the National Wildlife Refuge only becomes significant when our consumption is at a much lower level. We're consuming so much oil right now, mostly for our cars. It's not a significant amount in these other areas, despite what John says. I do respect the fact that technology has come along.
I'm not saying you don't retrofit the buildings and all that if it makes economic sense. You're sure nobody
And
wants
cars.
nobody wants to waste energy, and I'm not saying we do that.
I'm not so sure
But
that's right. I think a lot of people do not mind wasting energy because the price of wasting it has not been prohibitive.
Well, now you're getting into the intent of people when they get up in the morning.
What are we going to do about this economy, though, John Beto? I mean, we know that there's somewhere close to about 25 million that have been unemployed or unemployable
Or
and were given up
underemployed.
or
Underemployed,
underemployed. The stats are that a third of those people are black, a third of them are people over 50, and half of those people are without a high school education or with that or less. What kind of a job creation plan do we have that can possibly absorb this lost population?
Okay. All right. First of all, I would say that Washington cannot create a job, the kind that you're talking about.
Including the Bush Washington.
Well, I'm just saying the government is not in the business, cannot create the private sector jobs.
But I didn't hear you say whether or not George Bush was successful in creating jobs.
Well,
was
his
he?
tax cuts, I think, helped. All right, if you really want to get down to it. All right, because the economy did grow until the bubble burst and all that.
Then we lost 8 million.
But I'm trying to answer your question
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
Without you, I'm sorry I'm talking while you're in the process of interrupting me.
I just love to hear people brag on George Bush. That's what I like.
Well, he did some good things, as Obama has done some good things, as Bill Clinton. Nobody's either all good or all bad. They're somewhere in between, okay? Now, getting back to what I was saying, it's the market that creates the jobs. It's the economy that creates the jobs. It's the entrepreneur that has an idea like Steve Jobs, started that company in his garage. Mr. Hewlett, Mr. Packard started their company in the garage. The guy that started our business journal company started the company in his garage. Now, I'm not saying everybody should go to their garages and start businesses, but it's the free market. It's the entrepreneur.
Who's going to
that does
retrain
it.
25 million people, John?
Well, that's up to the people. That's really up to the people who run our education system, I say.
That's a government program.
And get it done. That's right. I actually believe public schools are a legitimate function of government. And until people are reading at or above their grade level, I think we should spend a lot of time and attention on that. But getting back to your original, I think somebody in Washington with dials and levers and trying to press the levers and adjust the dials to get the economy back, it's not going to work. Never has worked.
It hasn't worked over the last 3 years
It
of the
did-
Obama administration,
right.
and they were very
It
active.
didn't work in the Soviet Union. It doesn't work in China. It doesn't work
So
anywhere.
what do we do, though?
So how's the Fed going to help us, Leo?
Well, let's not talk the Fed. We don't have to go all the way to Washington to create jobs in good public-private partnerships. Earlier this month, I toured a waste management recycling facility here in Houston. It is the most sophisticated recycling facility created by one of our city's largest companies. And that was created because the city of Houston, under the White administration, worked hand in hand with waste management to guarantee that we would be able to pick up enough recycling material and deliver it. And hold on, and deliver it to waste management. And I toured that facility, and there are people working in that facility. There is machinery in that facility, albeit most of it coming from Europe, which is where that technology has been pioneered for recycling. Nevertheless, far more jobs are being created in that factory than in our landfills. And what is standing in the way of expanding that type of recycling operation here in the city of Houston is the failure of our local politicians to fund and come up with ways to fund an ongoing public-private partnership for expanding a single-stream recycling program here in Houston to create additional jobs and do the right thing. So I don't agree that government has no role whatsoever in the creation of jobs. We can point to Solyndra. Yes, Solyndra was a failure, but show me a venture capital firm, Kleiner Perkins, our most illustrious venture capital firm that hasn't experienced a failed venture investment. And I'll show you a venture firm that has never gone into business.
See, what you're talking about, you're talking about government who's picked a winner. Waste Management just won the lottery. They're going to get government money to put a program together. Now, if that program was so great, why did Waste Management sit around waiting for the government to fund it? Seems to me they should have gone to a venture capitalist or done a public offering.
Waste Management funded the factory. The city provides the recycling material through its truck pickup operations. And so that is the partnership.
No, you said
that exists.
You said they funded it early on.
Okay.
Government picked winners, Mr. Beto. They picked winners. It was called Wall Street. Remember that?
Yeah.
They picked winners there. How did that work out for us?
Well, see, you're assuming that I disagree with you. I think it's.
So, in other words, the business world failed us, and government helped. Is that what your position is?
No, my position is the only role the government should play in the economy is to guarantee that dollar in your pocket's worth as much tomorrow as it is today.
They've been failing pretty big on that.
And they failed pretty big on that. Now, should the government get into sports arenas? Should Rick Perry's Texas Technology Fund exist? I'd say no. I don't think that's the role of government. The taxpayer dollars should not be put at risk in funding companies' expansion or recycling plans or anything. I'd say unless, of course, if we have our children reading at or above our grade level, the crime rate's down to 0, all the roads are fixed and the bridges are repaired, and the military keeps us safe from all enemies, foreign and domestic, reliably safe. Then, if we've got money left over, then I say, let's have an electric car.
Rick Perry had proposed, as David mentioned, a flat tax, which basically gets rid of all exemptions and deductions. Do you think significant tax simplification can result in a lower rate but still bring in the constant revenue for the government?
Only if everybody pays taxes.
And is that part of the problem?
Well, I say half the taxpayers or potential taxpayers pay 0 income tax.
Well, this is something that conservatives like to point out. It is true that lower income people, and by the way, AP has reported this month that 1 out of 2 Americans are either at the poverty level or close to it. It's a staggering number of people who have been hurt by the stagnation in real wages. So I think that that conservatives don't recognize or don't acknowledge that quite a bit of taxes are paid by lower income people through the payroll taxes that we were talking about earlier in the show. So that is a significant portion of their income. They really don't have much left over to pay income taxes into the other discretionary expenditures that the government makes. Having said that, I think, Gary, that you and I both agree that we could have some simplification and should have some simplification of the tax code and elimination of subsidies and deductions that really people don't need, especially upper income people don't need. I think there's a lot that liberals and conservatives can come together over that. I don't know that you're going to be able to see a lower marginal tax rate or a lower statutory tax rate if that happens. It may be that we're just going to get back to funding the government to where we were before the Bush years.
How can we possibly do that, though? How can we, when Grover Norquist has extracted a promise from something like 200 Republicans...
I wanted to answer the question on the flat tax.
And this special interest guy has decided, what our long-term tax rates are going to be.
What kind of special interest guy are you talking about?
Grover. Grover is a special interest guy.
Okay.
It's called protecting the benefits that go to the upper income crowd that funds his organization and funds the grand old party.
Well, what about the labor unions? We want to talk about them and the breaks they get, and
you can.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Grover has people violating their oath of office. So he says this
the labor
promise,
unions don't have anybody violating their ooth of office.
What
do you think about that?
Pledge he does.
What pledge are they being made?
Understand. Grover Norquist is this month's
He's the boogeyman.
Pinata for the
Okay.
Democrats,
Right.
okay? Fact is, he doesn't control.
Let me talk about the flat tax, because I think it's a good topic.
Yeah, it is.
I think if you eliminated all the deductions, and I mean even the home mortgage deduction, and brought that rate down to 15%, I think you'd have a very well-funded government, and I think you'd have a very prosperous society.
Because it's predictable, simple.
The money and time and effort I spend doing my taxes would be relegated to about a half an hour, right? This is what I earned. 15% of that is what I owe. And another thing, I think if everybody had to pay their taxes at the end of the year, as opposed to this confiscatory policy where the government takes all that money without even seeing it go. I think you'd have tax reform pretty quick, by the way.
Well, I think that it's very, very palpable that things like the mortgage interest deduction, especially for Gary, vacation homes, people taking mortgage interest deductions, even charitable deductions. Here we are on PBS, so that's going to cause some
except PBS.
Except PBS, of course, they're going to cause some controversy. All sorts of deductions on Schedule A of your tax return. We will have to see what that does for flat tax rates and the possibility of it. I don't think you get there overnight, but it certainly helps you out.
Deductions are social engineering.
It's social engineering. That's
all
exactly
it is.
what
The government wants you to do something, so they give you a tax break to do it.
Yeah, and in many ways, the housing boom and bust of this decade may well have been goosed by the mortgage interest deduction.
That was goosed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which, by the way, aren't even mentioned in the
Once again, Happy New Year, John Beto, Leo Gold.
Happy New Year, David.
For everyone, thanks for being here, you guys.
Everybody, Gary.
And for all of you out there, Happy New Year to you. And by the way, visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about our guests. Watch the follow-up discussion of this show. And until next time, get informed and get active.
That's right.